My name is Anna Thompson, and I was 17 years old when I found a voice from the past, hidden under our kitchen floor. We lived in a small house at the edge of a forgotten town in northern England. It had one bedroom, a leaky roof, and cold walls that whispered with the wind in winter. The floor creaked when we walked. It was old, tired, and full of secrets. My mother worked as a hospital cleaner. She left home at 6 a.m. and came back after 7 p.m., always with tired eyes, calloused hands, and a plastic bag of bread or eggs. We didn't have much. We couldn't afford dreams. Most nights, we had toast for dinner. On lucky days, there was a boiled egg for each of us. My little brother, Sam, was only 8. He always said he wanted to be a police officer. I smiled at him, but never said what I truly felt. We don't become police officers, Sam. We just survive. That day, it was raining hard. Our ceiling had a small crack, and I had placed a steel bowl underneath to catch the drops. The house smelled like wet clothes and old wood. I was sweeping the floor with a broken broom, something I did every day. Suddenly, the broom hit something. Thunk. Not just a hollow sound. It was different. Heavy. I bent down and knocked on the wooden plank. It felt loose. I pushed it, and it moved. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. Underneath was a thin layer of dust and a suitcase. An old brown suitcase with rusted metal corners and a broken leather handle. I stared at it, frozen. I wasn't sure what I had found, but I felt it. I felt it deep in my chest. This was not just a forgotten box. This was a story waiting to be heard. I pulled the suitcase out slowly, carefully. It was heavier than I expected. Dust covered the top like a layer of forgotten time. The leather handle cracked as I touched it, and the metal lock was stiff with rust. My hands shook as I opened it, not knowing what I was about to find. Inside were a few old clothes, woolen, thick, and smelling of age. A faded scarf, a torn glove, a small notebook. And then I found the photograph. It was a black and white picture of a woman, probably in her 20s. She had high cheekbones, a serious mouth, and sharp eyes that seemed to look straight at me, even through time. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, and behind her was what looked like a war camp. Under the photo, in small, shaky handwriting, were the words, "To my little girl, wherever you are. If you ever find this, know that I never stopped loving you. M." I didn't understand. Who was this woman? And what did she mean by my little girl? I kept digging through the suitcase. There were letters tied with a red ribbon, yellowed with time but still readable. The first one started, "Dear my sweet Eleanor, I am sorry I left you." I read the first few lines, and my breath caught in my throat. These were letters from a mother to a daughter she had lost, or perhaps had to leave behind. And then something inside me whispered, what if I am that daughter? I didn't even know my father's family. My mother never talked about him or his past. Could this be connected to him? I took the photo and letters to my mother that evening. She was sitting on the bed, her feet soaking in a bucket of warm water. Her eyes were closed, tired. I sat beside her and placed the photo in her lap. She opened her eyes, slowly. At first, she didn't say anything. Then she stared at the woman in the photo for a long, long time. Finally, she whispered, "I never thought I'd see her again." I was shocked. "You know her?" She nodded. "That's Margaret, your grandfather's sister. She disappeared during the war. Some said she died. Others said she ran away. No one really knew, but your father used to say she had secrets, big ones." She looked at me and placed her hand on mine. "Anna, maybe this is why you found it. Maybe you were meant to." That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain tapped on the window like fingers trying to tell me something. I kept the photograph under my pillow and the letters on my desk. I didn't know who Margaret really was, but I knew one thing for sure. This was not just her story anymore. It was now a part of mine. The next morning, before Sam woke up and before my mother left for work, I sat at our small wooden table with the suitcase open beside me. The smell of old paper mixed with the weak aroma of tea that barely had milk in it. I untied the red ribbon from the letters and chose the one that looked the oldest. The paper was brittle, and the ink had faded in places, but the words still held weight. I began to read aloud, softly. "Dear my sweet Eleanor, I don't know if you'll ever find these letters, or if you'll even remember me. You were only 3 when I left. I didn't want to go, but war doesn't ask permission. I carried your photo in my pocket every day. I kissed it every night before I slept on cold ground or hospital floors. I was a nurse during the war, not by choice, but because I had to be. I saw men die, women scream, and children cry for mothers who never came. I cleaned blood from bandages and sometimes from my own hands, but what hurt the most was not holding you. I want you to know I never gave you away. I gave you a chance. They said you'd be safe with your aunt. I prayed she would raise you with love. I prayed you wouldn't hate me. Eleanor, if you ever feel alone, know this. I loved you more than my life. I left to protect you. And though I was silent all these years, my heart screamed your name every day. With all my love, Margaret." By the end of the letter, my eyes were full of tears. I had never known love like that. I mean, my mother loved us, yes. But this was the kind of love that carried a person through war, loneliness, and decades of silence. A love that didn't die with time. And though Margaret had written this for Eleanor, it felt like it was for me, too. Because I knew what it felt like to be forgotten, to be left behind by fate, to struggle without knowing if someone, somewhere, ever thought of you. I folded the letter carefully and held it to my chest. I didn't understand everything yet. I didn't know who Eleanor truly was, or if she had survived, or if I was somehow connected. But I knew this. I had to tell this story. Maybe it wasn't just Margaret's or Eleanor's story anymore. Maybe it was mine to carry forward. I looked at the empty pages in my school notebook and began writing. Not homework, not essays, but words from the heart. I found a suitcase under the floor. Inside it was a woman's pain, a mother's voice, and a love that refused to die. I sat at the kitchen table for hours that day, pen in hand, staring at the blank page. The letters from Margaret were spread around me like pieces of a puzzle. The photograph of her in the nurse's uniform lay beside my notebook. I didn't know how to start. I wasn't a writer. I wasn't even good in English class. My teachers always said my grammar needed work, that my spelling was inconsistent. But this wasn't about school. This was about something real, something that had lived and breathed and suffered in silence. So, I wrote the way I felt, not perfect, not polished, just honest. There was once a woman named Margaret who went to war, not to fight, but to save lives. She was brave, but she was also broken. She left behind a daughter, hoping love would find her one day. I didn't know Margaret. I don't know her daughter. But I know pain. I know what it means to be quiet too long. So I am telling her story. Because silence doesn't heal. Words do. I created a blog that evening using a free website builder. I called it The Suitcase Beneath the Floor. I uploaded a picture of the old suitcase and the photo of Margaret, then posted my first entry, just those words I had written in my notebook. I didn't expect anything. But that night I checked again before sleeping. 8 people had read it. The next morning, 32. By the evening, 112. 2 days later, I had over 500 views. And then came the comments. This made me cry. My grandmother was a war nurse too. Please keep writing. I want to know more about Margaret. Your voice is so real. Thank you for sharing this. Each message felt like a hand on my shoulder, like a voice saying, "You're not invisible anymore." I showed the blog to my mother after dinner. She read it slowly, her eyes not leaving the screen. When she finished, she looked at me, not with worry or tiredness, but with something new. Something I hadn't seen in years. Pride. You found something, Anna. A light inside all this darkness, she said quietly. Don't stop. That night, I sat beside Sam while he did his homework. He asked, Anna, are you famous now? I laughed. No, Sammy, not famous, just heard. And that was enough. Because when you've lived your whole life in silence, the smallest voice, even yours, can echo like thunder. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I received the email that changed everything. I had just returned from the grocery store, carrying a bag of discount bread and soup tins. Sam was watching cartoons, and my mother was still at work. I opened my laptop to check the blog, mostly out of habit now. The views were still growing, over 2,000. Then I saw it. Subject, I knew Margaret. From thomas.jenner1942@gmail.com. My heart skipped a beat. I clicked on it with trembling hands. Dear Anna, my name is Thomas Jenner. I'm 83 years old. I live in Nottingham, and I served as a medic during World War II. I found your blog through my grandson. He said someone was writing about Margaret Elkins. Margaret was not just a nurse. She was our light in the darkness. She saved more lives than anyone I've ever known. but there's something I need to tell you. Something not written in history books. Something that never left my heart. She didn't just save soldiers. She saved secrets. If you're willing to meet, I would like to tell you the truth, while I still have time. Thomas Jenner. I read it again and again. Margaret Elkins. So now I had her full name. I quickly searched it online. There were only a few mentions, mostly old war records. No obituary, no clear information about what happened after the war. But Thomas knew her. He remembered her. And he said she saved secrets. What did that mean? I showed the email to my mother. She looked at the screen for a long time, then said, Maybe there are things even she couldn't write in her letters. Do you think I should meet him? She placed her hand gently on mine and said, If someone has carried her truth for 70 years, you should help him let it go. That evening, I replied, Dear Mr. Jenner, thank you so much for your message. I would be honored to meet you. Please tell me when and where. Anna. 3 days later, I stood at the door of a small red brick house on the edge of Nottingham, suitcase in hand, not the old one from under the floor, but a small backpack with a notebook, pen, and the photo of Margaret. I knocked. The door opened slowly, and there stood a thin old man with silver hair, a walking cane, and eyes that still carried the war. He smiled weakly and said, You look like her. You have Margaret's eyes. Thomas led me into a small living room filled with old books, faded war medals, and photographs of people long gone. The fireplace crackled gently. He moved slowly, his cane tapping against the wooden floor. He motioned for me to sit. Would you like some tea? He asked, his voice like paper rubbing against stone. Yes, please, I said quietly. As he prepared the tea in the tiny kitchen, I looked around. On the mantel was a black and white photo of Thomas as a young man standing beside a woman in a nurse's uniform. I recognized her instantly. That's Margaret, I said. He nodded from the kitchen. That was taken in France, 1944, 2 days before everything changed. We sat across from each other, warm mugs in our hands. The room smelled of old paper, lemon, and something faintly like lavender. Then he began. Margaret wasn't just a nurse. She was chosen because of her language skills, her calm nature, and her strength. She worked with a secret unit of the British Army. Not many people knew it existed. We called it the Whispers. I leaned forward, heart pounding. They helped people escape from the Nazi camps. Jews, resistance fighters, even Allied spies. Margaret, she smuggled out children, changed their identities, hid them with families in England. I gasped softly. How did she manage that? By becoming invisible, he said. She was in hospitals and field tents, yes, but at night she disappeared into enemy territory. Once she carried a baby for 2 days in the snow, hiding in barns, just to bring her to safety. He took a deep breath and looked at the fire. One night, she returned to camp badly hurt, bullet in her shoulder. We patched her up, but she wouldn't stay. She said, "There's one more I have to save." "Who?" I asked. He looked directly into my eyes. "Her daughter." My throat dried. I could barely speak. "Eleanor?" He nodded. She wasn't just left behind. Margaret had hidden her with a family in the countryside, but they were threatened. She went back for her, but by then the war zone had shifted. She never found the child again. I felt something rising inside me, a storm of thoughts. Could it be? "Mr. Jenner, do you think I could be?" He smiled gently. "I can't say for sure, child, but the way you write, the way you feel. Margaret would have called you hers, whether by blood or by heart." He opened a drawer beside him and took out a thin envelope. "She left this with me. Said I'd know when to give it to the right person." He handed it to me with trembling fingers. "I think it's you." I took the envelope in my hands. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page, written in the same beautiful, fragile handwriting I had seen before. "To the one who carries my voice. If you're reading this, you found my past. But your courage is my future. I may never know who you are, but if you choose to tell my story, you're not just remembering me. You're saving others like me who were silenced. Never stop, and never be afraid to speak, even if your voice shakes. Margaret Elkins." I cried silently, holding the letter to my chest. That moment changed something in me. This was no longer about curiosity. It was a mission. When I returned home from Nottingham, the sky was cloudy, and my heart felt both heavy and lifted. Heavy from the truth I now carried, Margaret's secret. Lifted because I finally understood why I was the one to find that suitcase. It wasn't random. It was meant. That night I didn't sleep. I opened my blog editor, stared at the blinking cursor, and began to type. Not a post, not a memory, but a declaration. Some people leave behind wealth, others leave scars. Margaret left a voice, buried under floorboards, wrapped in dust, but alive. She fought wars no one gave her medals for. She saved lives no one ever counted. And now, through me, she speaks again, not as a ghost, not as history, but as a woman, a mother, a fighter. Her silence ends here. By the next morning, the blog post had gone viral, over 10,000 views in 12 hours. I received emails from people across the UK, Canada, America, even Germany and Poland. My grandmother always told me about a nurse who helped her escape. I think it was Margaret. Thank you for telling the stories of women like her. History forgot them, but we won't. Please start a podcast. Let her voice reach more ears. A podcast? Me? I'd never spoken into a mic in my life. But that night, I sat in the corner of my small room, used Sam's old gaming headset, and hit record. I spoke slowly, nervously, but truthfully. Episode 1. The Suitcase Beneath the Floor. My name is Anna. I'm 19. I live in a small apartment above a tired bakery. One day, I found a suitcase that didn't just hold letters. It held a woman's soul. And today, I tell you her story. By the end of the week, the podcast had 2,000 followers. By the end of the month, it had 25,000. And then came something I never expected, an email from the BBC. Dear Anna, we've followed your work. We believe Margaret's story needs to be shared with the world. Would you consider turning this into a documentary? I showed the email to my mother. She sat down slowly, her eyes wide. Do you even know what this means? She asked. I shook my head. Number. But I think Margaret does. I closed my eyes and imagined her, standing in that black and white photo, her nurse cap slightly tilted, holding a baby in the snow, hiding in silence, praying for someone to one day speak for her. That someone was me. The morning the BBC confirmed their interest, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. Suddenly, my quiet life was about to change in ways I could never imagine. Filming began within weeks. They came with cameras, lights, and questions that dug deep into my heart. But the story was bigger than me. It was Margaret's, Eleanor's, and all the silent heroes who risked everything. During the interviews, I met people who had never spoken about the past until now. Mrs. Goldberg, an elderly woman from London, held my hand tightly. Margaret saved me when I was just a child. I was hidden in a small village in the countryside. If she hadn't come, I wouldn't be here today. David, a retired medic, shared letters Margaret had sent him during the war. She was more than a nurse. She was family. Each story added layers of meaning to Margaret's sacrifice. Each voice reminded me why I had to keep telling her story. When the documentary aired, viewers across the UK and beyond watched in silence, tears, and hope. Emails flooded in. Messages from people who had felt invisible. Messages from young girls inspired to find their own voice. Messages from families searching for their lost histories. I realized something important. Margaret's silence had been broken not just by me, but by all of us. Her story became a light in the darkness, a reminder that even in the hardest times, love and courage can survive. That night, as I sat beside Sam reading a storybook, I whispered, "Thank you, Margaret, for trusting me with your voice." He smiled, looking up from his book. "Can you tell me another story tomorrow, Anna?" I hugged him tightly. "I will, every day." And so, the suitcase beneath the floor was no longer just a memory. It was a living, breathing story, one that I promised to carry forever. The success of the documentary opened many doors, but also brought challenges. Some questioned my right to tell Margaret's story. Others wanted to sensationalize it. But I knew what mattered. It wasn't fame or money. It was truth. I spent hours reading Margaret's letters, Thomas's memories, and the messages from people whose lives she had touched. Every word was a thread connecting past to present. If I could speak to Margaret now, I wrote in my blog, I would say thank you for trusting me with your past, for giving me a purpose. And I promise, your story will never be forgotten. Chapter 10. The Gift of Silence. Not all battles are loud. Margaret's fight was quiet, hidden beneath the noise of war, but it shaped generations. Her suitcase was a symbol, not just of loss, but of hope. At Sam's school assembly, I spoke about courage, the courage to face darkness and still choose kindness. The children listened with wide eyes. One little girl came up to me afterward and said, "I want to be brave like Margaret." Her words were a reminder. Legacies live on, not in statues, but in hearts. Years passed. The blog turned into a book, the podcast into a series. Margaret's story reached millions, and I, Anna, became more than a storyteller. I became a guardian of memory. One quiet evening, I returned to the old house where Thomas had lived. The suitcase beneath the floor was now in a museum, a place where others could learn, remember, and feel. Standing there, I whispered, "Thank you, Margaret, for showing me the power of a single voice." The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring and heart-touching tales, please subscribe to Chatterbox Kids. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss our new videos. Share your thoughts and feedback in the comments. Your voice matters to us. Join us on this beautiful journey to strengthen your English and explore new worlds through stories. Become a part of our family and let's learn together.